Fiwa kwamba hivi sasa kuna makundi ya kutetea haki za kibinadamu yanayoongozwa pamoja na Amnesty International, chama cha wanasheria KUJ pamoja na ICJ miongoni mwa mashirika mengine hivi sasa yanazungumza na wanahabari kuhusiana na kukamatwa kwa watu na vile vile kujeruhiwa kwa waandamanaji na kuuawa kwa waandamanaji wiki iliyopita. Hem, tusikize kidogo mkutano huo unaendelea katika Ufungamano House.
Police Reforms Working Group, a network of 23 human rights-based organizations in Kenya.
Good morning, my name is Dr. Wanaharakati. I am here representing the Medics for Kenya who've been setting up the medical response in various towns.
Good morning, Gloria Kimani from the Law Society of Kenya, also the police liaison in the Law Society of Kenya.
Okay, before we read our statement, we would like to just pause for a moment of silence, a moment of reflection, and a moment of solidarity with all those groups that we mentioned a few minutes. And I'm going to ask my colleagues to please stand up. For all those who were abducted, all those who were arrested, all those that suffered injuries as a result of police violence over the last 2 weeks, for all those who are intimidated and are currently being looked for, and very lastly, and most importantly, those who have lost their lives over the last 2 weeks, we salute your courage, we honor your commitment and your patriotism to this country, and we commit ourselves to protect all the constitutional freedoms and the human rights under our Constitution, and in particular Article 37, which is the right to assemble. Thank you very much. Six national associations of content creators, journalists, lawyers, medical practitioners, and human rights defenders issued this statement to pronounce our stand on the current state of human rights in the country, to clarify our position on the call for policy dialogue, and what we think is the way out of the crisis that Kenya is facing today. I'm going to invite Amakobe to basically read the next sentence.
Thank you very much. So as of last night, that is the 30th of June, 2024, 24 human beings have been killed by police officers, and at least over 361 people have reported several injuries. One of the youngest fatalities is 12-year-old Kennedy Onyango. There have been 627 arrests and 32 abductions. Now, abduction and detention differ from an arrest. Many of those who've been abducted by state officers were not read the charges against them, neither were they booked into a police station. Tens have been held incommunicado and denied access to their families, to legal representation, and to medical assistance.
The last 2 weeks have been stressful for our staff. Medical personnel have come under fire, arrests by state officers and had their patient lists stolen from mobile emergency centers serving the injured. Lawyers have been denied access to their clients, arrested and intimidated by police officers of the state to drop cases. Journalists covering the protests have had their cameras confiscated, arrested, and beaten in broad daylight. Staff operating helplines and funds set up to support legal representation and medical assistance have faced several experiences.
As national associations of professionals, we note the State House announcement of a multi-sectoral conversation to address policy issues raised by the youth of Kenya, otherwise known as the Gen Z protest movement. Gen Z have clearly spoken on the urgent need for the state to arrest public theft and a bloated cabinet, invest in essential services, act on those who have fired on unarmed protesters, release those who are arbitrarily arrested, and an end to extrajudicial killings, among other demands. Many of their demands, in our view, do not require policy dialogue, but they require decisive executive action. It is decisive executive action, not a state-led national conversation, that will restore this generation's faith in the Kenyan state. It will bring back confidence in our constitution and governance institutions. It will create a nation that is united and driven by our constitutional values. We call on the national administration and the 47 county administrations to listen and to act on the considerations and demands being raised by the Generation Z movement. Numerically, they represent the majority of Kenyans, with those with the greatest stake in redirecting the current crisis to a more hopeful future for us all. Many of us watched the presidential interview yesterday. We were struck by the absence of remorse and the commitment to accountability for the use of excessive and disproportionate force on many unarmed protesters. The first to fall, Rex Masai, was not carrying stones or any weapons. He was essentially leaving a protest that had run the entire day when he was shot and killed.
We end by reaffirming our role to protect all the rights and freedoms in our Constitution without fear or favor. We ask that the Kenya government and the authorities respect our mandates and stop the harassment of our staff and the interruption of legal, medical, and other public services. Security officers must cease the attacks on emergency medical centers and medical personnel. The government must provide necessary supplies, including ambulances, and guarantee the safety of caregivers during the planned protests for this week. Further, the state must meet the medical costs of the injured. It is a constitutional duty of the government to provide services to all, including protesters. The National Police Service must stop criminalizing and profiling protesters and cease using camouflaged, non-uniformed officers and unmarked cars with concealed license plates. We ask that the police and military strictly operate within the Constitution and our Bill of Rights during the protests called for this week. In essence, we are simply demanding the safeguarding of our Constitution. We are simply demanding that the rights of all Kenyans are respected and are fulfilled. Thank you so much for listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's open up for some questions and responses.
Miaka minne ya kujiandaa, miaka minne ya kujua ni nani mbabe.